also grew up in a Southern Baptist church, except for one where my dad was one of the pastors. I spent countless hours in Sunday school and youth group and worship services. During that time, I was taught what it meant to be a Christian. I was taught about Adam and Eve and the Ten Commandments, legalistic Jews, the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, the ABCs of how to respond to his sacrifice, even how to use an evangicube. I had it all. When I was 7, I overheard my dad talking to someone on the phone about what salvation meant. And something within me stirred and wanted what he was talking about. Later that night, my mom and dad and I had a more detailed conversation, one that I was actually supposed to hear. And I began following Jesus that night. Around my junior year of high school, I began to ask questions about what I had been taught. I was part of a study that walked through some of the early questions that Christians wrestled with. And I was exposed to faithful Christians who believed differently than I did. And during this time, I began to discover what it meant to have a faith of my own and not just the faith of my parents or the church that I grew up in. As my questions carried me into college, the theology that I had been taught wasn't really sufficient for the world that I encountered. I met people who questioned the church's relevance in a postmodern society, people who questioned the church's authenticity in the face of church scandals, and people who questioned the church's power in the face of great pain. As I listened, I began to wrestle with my own faith and calling, and I began to embrace these questions. And I realized, while a theological answer was available, people are often looking for lives lived with integrity, by people who speak with compassion and who help them make meaning of these experiences. The summer before my senior year of high school, I surrendered to a call of ministry while at a church camp, Crossroads, many of y'all know it. Looking back, I believe God had been pulling me in this direction for several years, but I resisted that call because I didn't want to just do the family business. It seemed like a bad reason to go into ministry. But eventually, even my stubborn heart was worn down by God's persistent pull. The call I felt was not to a specific kind of ministry, and I was less grasping for what the next step was. After my freshman year of college, I worked at a church in Chicago and spent a lot of time talking to a woman from Australia named Nina, whose family had a history of mental illness. Through conversations with her, I realized the poor and often damaging ways that the church has addressed this issue. I knew that I wanted pastoral care and counseling to be part of the ministry that I was a part of. So when I returned to school, I changed my major and I began studying sociology and psychology to kind of look at the individual and societal ways of how people interact with one another. Later at Mercer, opportunities at the Baptist Collegiate Ministry helped me recognize the desire to be involved in vocational church ministry. Since that time, I've had the opportunity to work in different churches. And often, Augustine's line that the church is a whore, but she's my mother, has rung soundly in my ears. Rarely is the church a pure and pleasant place to dwell, but I feel that I must be part of it. As Caitlin and I started dating, we began wrestling with this mutual calls to vocational ministry. Caitlin calls me to be creatively authentic and to love people well, people who are different from me. And she pushes me out of my comfort zone and into personal contact with them. During our time in seminary, we had the privilege to serve as resident chaplains at Baylor, as she just said. Living in a dorm with all these undergraduate students. Together we tried to provide pastoral care and keep them from killing themselves. This time has humbled me and reminded me of the privilege that it is to be with people in these moments. Pastoral care is not about easy solutions for life's problems, but helping the person hear the Holy Spirit. Hear how the Spirit is speaking in his or her life. And in those moments, I'm reminded again and again to listen to the Spirit of God and the person before me. Through studies at Truett and time spent in London working with new expressions of church in a post-Christendom society, I've been reminded again and again that the church is called to faithfulness and to obedience, not to efficiency or power. The church is a witness to what is to come, and often it is a poor witness. But it gets to point beyond itself to Jesus as Lord, the one who reconciles this relationship between God and humans. And as it does that well, it can be a faithful witness. I'm excited about the journey ahead, and I hope to pursue it as a servant pointing beyond myself to the God who is our only hope.